Welcome to the Engineering Success Podcast. Today we have a very special guest, Nathan Harvey, who leads the DORA research program at Google Cloud. Nathan is here to share his deep insights on DORA metrics, how to use them in startups, how to measure productivity, the State of DevOps Report 2024, and what makes high-performing teams tick. Joining as a host, along with Himanshu, we also have Rishi, who is the CTO at DevDynamics, as we dive into an engaging conversation about trends, metrics, and practical ways to improve how we build and deliver software. So now over to Rishi.
Myself, Rishi, almost 18 years of experience in the industry. Started my career with working with the product companies like Amdocs, British Telecom, VMware, Walmart, Disney. And yeah, I've been managing teams for almost last 8 years. One of the constant challenge I used to have when I was managing teams in Walmart and Disney was to make my leadership understand why we are so busy, right? Without data, it has always been a difficult conversation, right? Like I had pretty big teams, and whenever a new request or new feature request used to come, we always used to say that, okay, we are very busy, won't be able to do it. But as from a business and the leadership perspective, we were not delivering. This was a catch-22 situation where we are busy and nothing is getting delivered. I thought that why so difficult, right? Like why we are not able to prove that we are actually busy, and that's why basically I started exploring on this particular area. I started kind of collecting some information so that I can be some data-driven when I'm having a conversation with my leadership. And in Walmart, I was managing 2-3 teams. In Disney, I was managing more teams, much bigger structure. And this problem actually grew, right? Like exactly the same problem, and always a difficult conversation with the CTO that, okay, why we are not able to do things on time. And since I got a chance to sit in a basically broader table where other leaders were also present, I saw the same issue with them also, right? Like, and that's when I thought that maybe we can do something about it, solve this problem holistically, maybe in a more automated fashion instead of people doing things manually, creating a Jira reports or basically a different Git information, right? And that's how DevDynamics was born. Dynamics is a kind of full-fledged product, solving a lot of problems related to the engineering effectiveness, efficiency, making people understand where the time being spent. But yeah, there are still a lot of open questions, right? And we'll definitely talk about it in this particular chat, and we'll like to know your insights. How would you like to solve those problems? Yeah.
Nice. That's awesome. And my name's Nathan Harvey. I lead up the DORA team here at Google Cloud. I've been in industry for a very long time, and I've had a bunch of different roles from large enterprise software companies, obviously to a very large company like Google, but I've also spent time in startups. And of course, in a startup, I was fortunate enough to have basically every role that you might expect in a company, right? From software engineer to running operations to doing some finance and accounting, marketing, customer support, all of it, everything across the board. I was definitely responsible for at some point in my journey in that startup land. And so I'm really passionate though about bringing together communities to learn from each other and really help understand how do we as a community improve the practices that we have. And really that's what DORA is all about. It's a research program that's been running for over a decade. And this research really seeks to understand how do we help technology-driven teams and technology-driven organizations use technology to deliver more value to our businesses, deliver more value to our customers, and all of that is what we research. And it's really interesting there, Rishi, to hear about, man, we're so busy and we're doing so much work, but maybe we aren't shipping a whole lot or we aren't delivering a lot of value. And that disconnect that you often have between the technical practitioners and the business goals, I think is unfortunately it's relatively common. And one of the things that our research has shown, especially over the past few years, one of the topics that we've been digging into is this idea of user centricity are your technical teams closely connected and thinking about what are the goals of the users of our applications? And I would contrast this with a technical team who like is focused on what's the next task we're going to pull off the backlog, right? We just take the features that were being requested, we build them as quickly as we can, we ship them out, and then we go back to the backlog and pull off another. That to me almost feels like factory work, right? And unfortunately, we oftentimes talk about this idea of a software factory. And I think that that's a really bad analogy or model for us to use within the industry, because it's not just about pulling work off of the backlog, but it is about having a deep understanding of the domain that you're trying to solve for. And you can't have that deep understanding of the domain if you're not well connected to the users of the product and understand who is using this application or service that I'm responsible for building, how are they using it, and really being as tightly coupled as you can to understanding what those users are after so that you can deliver the best value.
I mean,
And
I
then,
call this busy without work, where
yes.
team is busy doing a lot of things, but still the actual valuable work is not being visible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is also a real challenge and an opportunity for us as technical practitioners to partner better with the business to help improve the visibility of work that we have, and frankly, to cut down on the amount of work that we have in process. We all want to start something new, start something new,
Right.
start something new. But the truth is, the best value that we can do and the best results we can deliver are when we focus on completing a task, like shipping a thing all the way through and then picking up the next one. So as we minimize the work in process and make the work that we do have visible, we can
Right.
make better prioritization decisions.
If you look at how things have evolved, this is the very recent and new happening, and this is one of the questions that I do like. I try to ask almost all the tech leaders that I meet that when you start your work, you usually are not exposed to the business side of things, and as developers, as engineers, you are really attached to what you're doing. Like, uh, of course, your lines of codes feels like your baby, but now with the whole engineering being so fast, while the problem is that for a lot of engineers, we don't see that they getting the opportunity to understand the business side of things. So,
Mhm.
Nathan, because you've been in different roles, of course, and you said you've tried all the roles in a startup. Uh, how do you think can people who are really getting started with their engineering career can develop this business acumen, this ability to really think from the user's perspective?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that you can do there. And first, I definitely agree. Like when we go to school to learn to be a computer scientist or to be an engineer, right? We study so much algorithms and data structures and things like this, and all of those are really important, but they aren't important on their own. They're important in service of something else, right? And so I think it is really important to understand. I often say, like, what is the business of your business? What business are you in, and do you understand that? As an engineer, we oftentimes, we think about, oh, there's the business over there. My job is to engineer. My job is to write code, and the business people figure out the businessy things. But the truth of the matter is, I think that as engineers, one of the traits that we typically have is curiosity. And so while we're curious about how do we best architect this application, what is the latest algorithm that I could use to solve this problem? What's the new AI technology that I can bring to bear here? I think we should take that same level of curiosity and have conversations with the business, really try to understand who are our customers. And if if you have trouble talking to the business people, another avenue that you can take, or another approach that you can take, engineering is often relatively close to things like customer support. So even if you could go and spend a couple of hours sitting next to a support engineer, someone who's taking calls from customers about your application or opening tickets up about the application, that as an engineer is going to help you really understand and get much closer to how are people using our products and where are they running into trouble. And then a final thing that I would recommend that you do as an engineer on a team, you're working on an application, I would encourage you to sort of take off your engineering hat and put on your customer hat. and use the application that you're building as if you were a customer. So maybe you're working on, I don't know, you said, Himanshu, that you were in a fintech. So maybe you're working on a banking application, right? A retail banking application. Maybe just as an engineer, sign up for a new account. Just walk through that process and see, what does it take? What are the interactions that I have? What is the experience like? Simply doing that is going to help you start thinking a little bit more like your customers and understanding what they're trying to do. And I think that makes you a much better engineer.
I was that kind of engineer before, who used to think, I mean, that my only job is to code and deliver features, and it's the job of product managers and like others to figure out what need to be built, right? Like, I mean, but after starting DevDynamics, I realized very early in the game that basically without talking to the users, you won't be able to build a good product, right? Like initially we build something and then we realize that this is not useful to them. And as a practice, we are a very small team, right? Like we don't have a support team as such. So I'm the first support engineer. So I take all the calls and basically intercom. I take care of all the intercom support tickets. So that
Yep.
it helps me a lot in figuring out what we need to build next, right? Like what are the things which are actually useful and what are the things we are just like wasting time on it. Is there some reading material around this? Any book you would recommend? Because technical people read a lot of technical stuff. Something you would like to recommend for engineers and like.
Yeah, for sure. I don't have a title off of the top of my head, but I'll maybe talk about a category of books that you might like to look at. As you mentioned, yeah, as an engineer, you said, well, it's the product manager's job to figure out what should we be building next. Well, that's a great insight right there. Go read some books about how to be a better product manager and understand what is the role of product management, because I think that again is going to really help you as an engineer. And one of the sort of one of the pitfalls that you fall into as an engineer is a product manager might come to you with a solution instead of coming to you with a problem. And when they come to you with a solution, like it's just kind of human nature that they're bringing us the work. We're going to do the work that they're asking for. So you're going to build whatever solution they asked for. If instead they bring you a problem, now there's an opportunity for you to collaborate together with that product manager to come up with what is the best solution, and then really think about how are you going to go and build that. I think another thing that, or another sort of area that I might look into in terms of books and reading is maybe some of the books that Google and others have published around site reliability engineering, or SRE. And the reason I lean on SRE in this particular fashion or matter is there's this really interesting question that SREs always ask. How much reliability is enough, and how much reliability is too much? Too much. Can you actually have too much reliability? Well, if you go and ask a product manager, how much reliability would you like? The product manager by nature is going to say, well, this product should be really reliable. In fact, I think it should be 110% reliable. Well, we know that you can't get 110%, and even 100% reliable is probably too much, because as engineers, we know what does it take regardless of how you measure reliability, right? Reliability can be measured in a bunch of different ways: latency, availability, correctness, freshness of data, etc. Like all of these are facets or components of reliability. We know that getting to 100% reliability is one, unachievable, but as we get closer and closer to it, it becomes way more expensive. In fact, it could become so expensive that we spend all of our time focused on keeping the services reliable and none of our time changing how the services work, like improving them, adding new features, things like this. Nobody wants that. So the answer to the question of like how reliable is enough is in the SRE world, we basically say, look, we want to keep a typical user happy enough with the application that they keep coming back to it, right? And so to answer like, well, how happy is that? We have to understand what is the application that we're building, who is a typical user, what are they trying to accomplish, right? You already start having to ask these questions. I'll give you a great example. Let's say you work at an organization, and this is a relatively large organization, so large, in fact, and they have a concentration of people that in the building where the company works, they have a cafe where you can go and get lunch. And that cafe has an online menu application. How reliable does that menu application need to be? Does it need to work on the weekends? Probably not. Is it okay if it goes offline at 2 a.m.? Sure. We look at it for lunch. What's happening at lunch? If I'm checking the lunch menu at 2 a.m. and it's unavailable, I'll check it later when I should be, reasonably awake and maybe I'm starting to get hungry for lunch. On the flip side to that, if we go back to that retail banking application, like, can your retail banking application have banker's hours? Like, it works from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m.? No, it has to work more than that. It has to be more available than that, more reliable than that. And so just understanding the differences between those two and starting to ask those questions of like, what is good enough to keep a typical user coming back and using this application.
Oh,
And one of the
I
other
completely agree with
components that goes into that really quickly, one of the components that goes into that is, what are their other options, right? For that menu application, like, there aren't any other options. This is the cafe in your building. So you're kind of stuck here. That means we can lower the reliability a lot without losing users.
that.
That retail banking application is a completely different question, or a different answer anyhow. Sorry, Rishi, I think I cut you off.
I completely agree with your point. I've learned a very hard way that basically sometimes as an engineer, you tend to over-engineer things, right? Like you just want to build something great and which is very scalable in nature. But as you keep on adding these factors of reliability, scalability, it's more expensive to build, more expensive to test, and it has its own issues, right? Like so. It's very important for us to understand as engineers that what's the application of that particular feature, right? Like how exactly it is going to use, how many people are going to use it, and that completely changes the way you are going to build that application. Completely
Yeah,
agree with that.
absolutely. And for something like a new feature, it's next to impossible to answer the question, how many users are going to use this? The only way to answer that question is to put that new feature in front of users. So therefore, the faster we can get that product, that feature into production, the faster we can get feedback from our users. And maybe we ship it to production, we find no users are using it. Does that mean the feature is bad? Not necessarily. Like, that we start asking a bunch of other questions. Well, how do they discover this new feature? What sort of, advertising do we have? How are we incentivizing them to use this new feature? Those might be other components that we need to start thinking about. Or maybe the feature is just bad and it was a mistake. We can roll that feature back and focus on something else. But building something iteratively gives you that fast feedback mechanism, and there's no better feedback mechanism than real customers.
I just wanted to acknowledge and sort of reflected on what you said earlier. The way I have looked at DORA all along is okay, these are metrics. But today, when you were talking about DORA and when you said that DORA is a program, that really reflected, and uh, I could understand. So initially, like if you say metric, it looks like okay, a certain number you're trying to achieve. But when you say program, it almost tells you that it is an iterative process. It will evolve over the time. The metrics would change. What really got me excited with this year's report was that we spoke about some new additional metrics like rework rate, basically expanding the horizon of DORA. What has been the process internally at Google DORA team to really extend its scope now? I mean, what led to thinking of getting new metrics into the whole DORA ecosystem?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I think DORA is, as you know, excuse me, DORA is well known for those 4 measures, right? Those 4 measures of software delivery performance. The truth is that DORA since its inception has researched things beyond just those 4 metrics. We kind of use those as maybe a center of gravity. But the question is really, first, how does software delivery performance relate to outcomes that we care about? Outcomes like organizational performance, revenue and profitability, but also outcomes for the people in the organization, things like well-being on your team. And we talk about well-being as things like job satisfaction and burnout. We want one to go up and one to go down. Hopefully you know which is which of those two. But these are the things that we care about as sort of outcomes. And what we seek to understand is, does software delivery performance drive those outcomes? Does improving your software delivery performance lead to those outcomes? And throughout our research, the answer is a pretty solid yes. But there's this other question. how do you get better at software delivery performance? And that's where we have to look at other areas. We have to look at technical practices like, I don't know, simple ones like, are you using version control, to more sophisticated ones. Are you practicing continuous integration? Do you have continuous delivery? What does test automation look like, et cetera? But it goes beyond just those technical practices. We also think about things like the process that you have. Like, what does your change approval process look like? When you work in a large enterprise, oftentimes the change approval process gets very heavyweight, right? There's a change approval board that meets every 2 weeks. You can't ship until the change approval board approves your changes, etc. So we want to look at things like that. And then there's also cultural practices. What happens when something goes wrong in your organization? Do we look to, oh, something went wrong, who should we fire? That's not a good cultural approach, right? That does not encourage risk taking. That does not encourage experimentation. Or do we look at, something went wrong? Let's see what we can learn from this. Let's see what we can learn from this failure. And let's think about what can we learn as people? What can we learn about our systems, like the technology? What processes can we change? So this has always been the scope of DORA. We look at a lot of things with software delivery performance as sort of the center of gravity, if you will. Now, you are right. We've changed how those metrics work over time. In fact, they've kind of always been evolving. I think early on in the research, we asked, how frequently does your organization deploy code? How long does it take for a change to get into production within your organization? But more recently, and this is for the bulk of the research, I would say, we don't ask about your organization when we talk about software delivery performance. We ask about the application or service that you work on. Because the truth is, in an organization, you're likely to have hundreds, maybe thousands of different applications, each with their own context, each with their own set of users. How do we measure each one of those is really important. And then those 4 metrics evolve all the time. They're typically slow to evolve, and we have to take a slow approach to evolving them just because of the history that we have with them. They've proven to be really good metrics, so occasionally we test new things with them. As an example, one of our metrics is the change fail rate. And the change fail rate, we changed how it works last year. We asked the same question, but in previous years, when we asked you, and the change fail rate, the question is something along the lines of, for the primary application or service that you work on, how many software deliveries, how many deployments lead to an immediate issue that you either have to roll back or push forward a hotfix for? If so, that would be a change failure. In the past, we asked, like, what percentage of your deployments? And we gave you buckets to answer in, 0 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to, et cetera, right? I don't know if it was 5 or 6 different buckets. We found that this number wasn't giving us enough good signal. So last year, we changed how you could answer that question. Instead of providing 5 or 6 buckets, we gave you a slider, and you could answer any whole percentage from 0% to 100%. That gave us more precision in the answers that we got, and it helped that question or that metric load better or have better covariance with the other metrics. But there's another thing about that particular metric. It's never really loaded or had the same covariance as the others super well. I kind of say that deployment frequency, your change lead time, and your failed deployment recovery time have always kind of been siblings. And change fail rate always felt like a cousin, right? So just a little bit distant, still related, but a little bit distant. Last year, when we changed that precision, it got closer. So maybe it was a cousin who lived next door, but it was still a cousin, right? Not yet a sibling. But we've also had this hypothesis that change fail rate is really a good proxy for how much rework do you have to do on your team, right? Because when you push something to production and it fails, you've got to fix that. Your project plan didn't say push to production and then fix the failures, right? You never planned that work, but it was right there in front of you. You had to do it. So we wanted to test that hypothesis this year. So we added a new question about rework. And that was basically, in the last 6 months, think about the deployments that you made to production. How many of them were unplanned, but instead were done as a result of some incident that happened in production, likely a change failure? And what we found was that change failure rate and rework rate They are siblings. They have a lot of covariance. They're still cousins to the other three, but this helped us really get much more clarity on these ideas of throughput and stability and how they might line up. So it's things like that that we're always experimenting with. And the way that we get to those experiments and those hypotheses is through conversations like this. We talk with the community of practitioners that are taking these ideas and our findings and putting them into practice. A lot of those conversations happen over on Dora.community, where, well, as the name implies, we've got a community of practice built up around Dora. It's thousands of practitioners and leaders and researchers from around the world coming together and sharing the lessons that they've learned, the cautionary tales that they've found, and so forth.
I have a related question. You talked about change failure, right? And I think it's the most complex metrics in the whole DORA, right? Like, definitely it look like bit disconnected, but at the same time, it's very difficult to measure also, right? Like,
Mm.
I think there's no straight, I mean, like, for example, deployment frequency, there's a straightforward way to figure it out, like how many deployments they're doing, but change failure rate is not that straightforward. I mean, I would like to hear your thoughts that how the companies basically try to figure out the change failure. What according to you are the best practices to kind of calculate that particular information, or get that information?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll just start with a reminder of how Dora collects most of our data, and that's through surveys, right? Each year we run a big annual survey. In 2025, we'll probably run many surveys. Maybe some of them will be smaller, but maybe one big annual survey. But surveys is how we get a lot of our data. So one of the best ways to understand what's the change fail rate for an application is to ask the team responsible for that application. Now, is that a completely precise signal? Are you going to capture every single one? Are you going to have precision down to like the hundredth in your percentages? Nope. That's probably okay. But I know, I hear you. But Nathan, I want real data. I'm an engineer. I want precision. All right. So, what are some of the other ways that you can identify change failures? One way to look at is if you look at your deployment frequency, which Rishi, as you said, is easy to measure. There are certainly some nuances there, but we'll just set those aside for a moment. But let's say your deployment frequency, your regular deployment frequency is once every 2 weeks. But every 2 weeks, we have a deployment. And maybe if we look at the month of March, we saw that there were 6 deployments in the month of March. That's more frequently than every 2 weeks. How close were those deployments to one another? If you had a deployment that went out in the morning and then another one that went out 2 hours later, you can almost bet that that morning deployment was bad because you had a very fast follow, another deployment, right? And then you can actually use the delta between those to figure out also what's your failed deployment recovery time. So one heuristic that you can use is look for deployments that are very close to one another, and probably they're done to fix something that went wrong. Now you might have to go and ask the team, like, is that what was happening here or not? But it's certainly a good signal. Another way that I've seen teams allow for this is there's an API call that the release engineering team, whoever that happens to be, can make. We made a deployment. Oh, that went bad. Let me just call an API, like drop a thing that says, hey, that was a bad deployment, count it as such, and let's move on. Let's move on with the work. So there's a couple of different tactics that you can use like that. There's probably others that we've explored in the DORA community mailing list. So I would definitely recommend searching there as well.
I think it's always a context driven, right? Like, team knows the best, and maybe even if this has to be automated, not there won't be a one solution which will fit for everyone, right? Like, everyone have to have their own way of kind of calculating this particular data point.
Yeah.
So one thing I would like to understand is that is DORA relevant for everyone, right? Like, is DORA relevant for startup, mid-sized company, or bigger, like bigger organization for sure? Should a startup company should know that what's their delivery performance? So what's your thought on that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I get this question a lot, and I'll give a couple of different answers for you here. So the first is if we step all the way back and look at the underlying philosophy of DORA, the underlying philosophy of DORA is to help technology-driven teams understand where they are and go on a journey of continuous improvement. Our tagline is get better at getting better. So I would argue that it doesn't matter how big your team is, You should be on a journey of continuous improvement. You can be a team of one, and individually, you should hope to improve a little bit every day or every week or every month, right? So I think that DORA, yeah, absolutely applies there. Now, do I need a dashboard that shows me my 4 software delivery metrics, and maybe a bunch of other insights? If I'm a very small team, probably not. Probably not. But part of this is that, if we want to understand how is our software delivery performance going, first, I don't really care what is the actual hard number. What I care about is how has the performance changed over time. On a smaller startup team, in your retrospectives, in your planning sessions, you can ask the question, is our software delivery performance getting better or is it getting worse? And then start to make decisions based on that. You don't need a dashboard for that. You need a conversation for that. And so as the team goes from a small sort of dedicated team that's in a startup, and we start to have multiple teams and maybe multiple applications, now is when we really want to start bringing a little bit more sort of rigor, if you will, or discipline to asking those questions. One great way to bring rigor and discipline to asking those questions is to build a dashboard that collects that data for you and that we can review that data on a regular cadence. So I think it starts with a thought and a conversation. The beautiful thing about conversations is that throughout human history, conversations have scaled really well. Right? Conversations are a great way for us to exchange ideas, to come up with ideas, and to implement new things that we want to do. So I always lean back to conversations. Now, conversations, unfortunately, only scale about as large as the community of people that's in that conversation, right? So now we start thinking about documentation, we start thinking about dashboards and driving those practices out. So is DORA useful in the small startup? The ideas of DORA are useful in the small startup, yes. And as you grow to a huge enterprise, multinational enterprise, DORA will be there with you, and it will grow together with you as part of your organization.
Perfect. Any example you would like to give for our audience to kind of relate to it, right?
Yeah. So each year we run a round of DORA awards, and so we get people that are using DORA to nominate themselves and sort of tell us their story, and we've got always some really fascinating stories there. One DORA award that pops into mind is Uber. They've used DORA and Google Cloud to sort of drive their practices, and some of the outcomes that they've achieved are really fascinating. Yes, they're shipping faster. They're also more secure because as they're shipping smaller things and re-architecting things, they're minimizing the attack surface that they have on some of their applications. But I think for me, the most fascinating thing that they're measuring and improving is their carbon footprint. By changing out their architecture and allowing them to deliver changes fast, they can then also reduce their carbon footprint of all of the running services that they have. And to me, that's a really cool example. Another great example is the team over at Vodafone. They do a ton of stuff with machine learning. And before they were using both Google Cloud and DORA together, it was taking them something like 6 months to get a new model into production. Today, they get a new model into production in 2 weeks. So that is a tremendous value add for them. Think about the number of experiments and the lessons that they can learn every 2 weeks instead of twice a year. There's just tremendous opportunity there. So it's things like that. And then, of course, there are also some pitfalls that I have. I'll share one quick pitfall. We had a team that, they ran an assessment internally, a survey internally to understand how was their software delivery performance. And they were unhappy, unsatisfied with the precision of a survey. So they said, we need a dashboard. So they spent 2 years integrating all of their systems to build a dashboard. At the end of those 2 years, the dashboard basically told them the same thing that their survey told them 2 years ago. They'd done nothing to improve their developer experience, their software delivery performance, but you know what? They had precise data now. Oh, also, no one ever looked at those dashboards. So it was a complete waste of energy and investment. So my counter to that is first, you probably don't need a dashboard. If I can't convince you that, you should definitely not build it yourself. There are plenty of vendors out there in the space. I don't know, DevDynamics might be one of those that can help you collect all of that data and start to visualize it. At the end of the day, it's not about collecting and visualizing the data. It's about changing the way that you work. And that data should help drive the decisions that help you drive change. So focus on the change, not on the precision of the measurements that you have. As you make changes, you can include some of those changes improving the precision of the data that you're collecting, but take an iterative approach, just like you would with anything else.
I would say that, yeah, basically look for the signals, right? Instead of getting too much into the data, look for the signal. Right? And these signals can either come from these dashboards or it can come from the surveys, and try to understand what exactly these signals are saying. I mean, what you just explained about the carbon footprint, right? Like I could never imagine that basically you can get such kind of real benefit of using or understanding it and ultimately making an improvement which lead to some unexpected changes.
So of course, the way DORA has evolved, and I think I'm sort of circling back to our initial conversation around rework rate. So in this year's report, like there were a lot of things discussed beyond the rework rate. Like, of course, we talked about developer experience. You're talking about flow efficiency and I think cognitive overload between teams and documentation quality. So a lot of these things have come into play. So Nathan, like if we could give a certain context around these metrics as well, all the new things that we see in this year's report.
Yeah, for sure. All of these are sort of those conditions we think that enable the great outcomes that you want. Conditions that help you with improved software delivery performance, conditions that help you with better well-being on your team, and so forth. And so we start each year with a hypothesis that these are good conditions that lead to those things. We have to go test that hypothesis, though. So we go out and we measure those things. And again, the way that we measure those things is through a survey, largely. That's how we collect our data, is through surveys. And so each year we actually publish the questions that we ask in the survey. So if you go to dora.dev, you'll find the research page there. And in the research page, you'll find links to all of the years. So if you go to dora.dev and then research and then 2024, you'll see a tab for all of the questions that we asked. And so there you can start to understand, how did we measure something like documentation quality? And I'm just going to pull it up really quick because I want to say the right words when I tell you how we measured that. So give me 1 second while I just pull it up in my browser. So if I look at documentation, here are the questions that we ask. What we do is we put a statement in front of you and we ask you to rate it on a scale from strongly disagree all the way to strongly agree. And so the documentation measures that we use, I can rely on our technical documentation when I need to use or work on the service or applications I work on. It's easy to find the right technical document when I need to understand something about the services or applications I work on. Technical documentation is updated as changes are made. And when there's an incident or a problem that needs troubleshooting, I reach for the documentation. So basically, the characteristics of good quality documentation are that you can rely on it, it's easy to find, it's up to date, and it provides utility. It's useful for you when you have to perform a particular task, like troubleshooting an incident. That's how we start to measure documentation quality. And it is, I think, really important to understand, how did we measure a thing as we talk about it? While we say, we've improved, like improvements to documentation lead to great outcomes, none of those were how many documents have you written, right? It's not about the quantity of the documentation, but rather truly about the quality of the documentation.
Since we are talking about the documentation, I suppose almost all the engineering teams struggle with it, irrespective of the startup or the big companies. Engineers don't like doing documentation. But with AI coming into the picture, and maybe this is a good time to switch gear to the AI, I think this has changed, right? Like AI gives you that opportunity where basically you really don't need to spend that much of time on writing a exact correct documentation. Maybe you have to give some context and AI can help you out, right? So Nathan, would love to hear your thoughts on this, right? Like we have seen it, and since we work with a lot of companies, we have the AI measurement report, and we help companies to understand how the AI is impacting their team productivity. And like DORA, we have also found out that though it helps a lot to the engineers, their output or throughput improves, but overall,
Yep.
their delivery performance is still not impacted by that amount of time. So yeah, I mean, I would love to hear your thoughts that how is AI changing the engineering world? What's the impact it is making?
Yeah, of course, in 2024, we had a deep dive into AI and all of its impacts. And let's stay on AI and documentation and talk about those two together, because I think that's really fascinating. So first and foremost, I think it requires saying AI is not going to replace technical writers in the same way that AI is not going to replace software engineers. And it would be a folly to think that that was going to be the case. Just like engineers get deep domain expertise into the problem they're trying to solve, and yes, use AI to help solve that problem. The same thing happens with tech writers and being able to really structure information and convey it in the right way. So, and then I'm also very empathetic to your point that, engineers don't really like writing documentation. I'm an engineer. I should be writing code, not documentation. And the truth is, if we think about those measures of quality documentation, do you reach for it during an incident? Look, as an engineer, you're going to have to change something about your system. And even if it was you that wrote that system, having some good documentation about what decisions you made and why you made those decisions is going to help you in the future when you need to change that. We've been researching documentation since about 2021. So I'd recommend that you go look at the 2021, 2022, 23, and 24 reports to get some really good insights into how do teams prioritize documentation? How do you incentivize good documentation? Because all of that matters. Now, coming back to AI, one of the things that we found in this year's report that is teams increase their reliance on AI. So they're using it more, they're relying on it more. Documentation quality also improves. Now, I think there's two factors that are happening here. The first is, as you've said, Rishi, we can use AI to write documentation. And what's terrible is sitting down to a blank page to have to write documentation. You know what's better is sitting down to a page of really bad documentation and being asked to fix it. Now, I'm not saying that AI writes really bad documentation, but it certainly gives you that jump start. And now as a person with a deep understanding of the thing that's being documented, the code base, the application that you're working on, I can correct that documentation and make it more factual, make it more accurate. But AI gives me that great jumping off point. The other thing that we found with AI, we look at how teams are relying on it, and two of the biggest things that bubbled to the top, writing code and summarizing information. So we see with more AI usage, documentation quality improves. It could be that AI is helping us write better quality documentation. It could also be that AI is helping us summarize and find the existing documentation that we have. So potentially the documentation quality, the underlying documentation quality doesn't change at all. But my ability to get usefulness out of that documentation through AI improves. So I think the answer is yes. It's both that the AI is improving the underlying quality and AI is helping me get more utility or usefulness out of the existing documentation. That's why we see such a big lift. And then when we look at how these conditions or capabilities interact with one another, documentation unlocks and amplifies many of the other practices and conditions that we talk about. So it's a really, really powerful dial that you can turn up. And with AI, you can turn it up with more ease. So it's a really interesting and fascinating story here how documentation, AI, and technical teams all kind of work together.
I mean, to your point, and this was my second question, was around like overall AI impact on the software delivery, right? And today only, by the way, I wrote this particular post on LinkedIn that don't worry, engineers, AI is not going to replace you, because I myself use AI, code assistance a lot. It can be a good assistant, but
Yes.
I still find it difficult when I have to write a complex business logic, and what AI has written, sometimes I'm not able to even debug that, right? Like, it take more time to me. And then I go back and prefer my own way. So yeah, I would like to hear your thoughts on like how the AI is making an impact on overall software delivery.
Yeah, so one of the things that we found is that software delivery performance, as measured by those metrics that we've talked about earlier in the show, it's actually decreasing as you rely more and more on AI. We don't really know why that is, but we do have some hypotheses, and I'll share those with you. Before I get to the hypotheses, though, I should say that we are seeing some really positive impacts that AI is having, though. It's helping, as you said, developers stay in the flow. It's helping with documentation quality. It's helping with code complexity. It's helping slightly with technical debt, reducing technical debt a little bit. It's helping get changes approved faster. So there are lots of good things that are happening with software, with those conditions for technology-driven teams that AI is contributing to. But I think that as an industry, one of the things that we've been very focused on with AI is its use in generating code. Now take that idea with one of the things that we know, one of the best ways to improve your software delivery performance is to ship smaller changes. When you ship small changes, they're easy to move through the pipeline, easy to reason about. Something goes wrong, you can roll them back easily. Well, AI has just come along and helped me as an engineer write a whole lot more code in the same amount of time I might have written a small change. So if we're trying to ship larger changes through the system, we should expect software delivery performance to fall off. That's not to say stop using AI, because I think that you should continue experimenting with AI and find even better ways to work with it. And then to your point, Rishi, maybe the other reason software delivery performance is falling off is how AI gets trained. AI models are trained on a huge corpus of information and data and code. But you're not trying to solve all of the world's problems. You're trying to
Yeah.
solve a particular problem in your business context, in your, following your policies, the norms of your team. If the AI doesn't have that context, it might not make the best suggestions for you. And so I think, again, as we see advances in AI, one example is with Gemini Code Assist, we have much better opportunity in the enterprise version to bring in all of your policies, all of your best code bases, and use that as context for every code snippet that we suggest, improving that quality and making it feel more like it's code written by Rishi's team, not code written by some generic LLM.
This is a great example, right? Like, and these are the kind of system maybe we will need as maybe I'm expecting something around it in 2025, which actually is a real assistant, which actually understand the context of your business, right? Like, which understand
Yes.
your existing code base, and yeah, it's able to give something which you are about to write, right? Like it is helping you in a real manner. I mean. I think we, to me, this was a very insightful conversation. I have a lot more questions to ask, and I don't think we have enough time for that. So, but I would love to hear your thoughts more in future. We would love to attend your sessions and all. And if we get an opportunity, maybe in 2025, we'll again discuss 2025 DevOps report.
One thing that I was particularly interested this year was to understand. So I went through a couple of previous years' reports. You see some incremental changes, but what has changed from 2022 to 2024? You see a lot. I mean, the magnitude of those changes was a little higher. You see a lot of newer discussions. Uh, but I think a lot of it got answered with your introduction to DORA itself. I think I'm saying it again, that when you say that DORA is a program, now the way you look at it, the way you approach it, the whole approach changes. Now you know that okay, it is changing. It's something fluid. It is evolving,
Yes.
and every time something evolves, something new. I mean, that's how evolution works, right? Something new comes into the picture, something old falls back. All I could say is thank you so much for taking the time today. And as Rishi said, would want to probably sit down again with you next year discussing the report in detail. But I think a lot of value was created in this conversation. Simply, okay, one of the things which you said, that okay, you don't need a dashboard. Like when you talk about measuring something, it's not about those numbers. It is about understanding the trend, the outcome of the trends.
Yeah, one of the things that we say in this year's report is we don't want you to become an elite performer. Instead, I want you to become an elite improver, right? As you're always improving, this is the way that you get to elite performance. It's by small iterative improvements over time and staying committed to that. And in terms of the program, look, we are researching a very complex system, right? And this complexity exists differently in every context. The complexity is very difficult to understand. Like, I change one thing over here, what are going to be the ripple effects? And the truth is, as a team, we never change just one thing. Things are always in motion. So how do we understand this complex system that's always moving? How do we get some good signal out of that so that we can use that as advice for what you should do? It's very difficult to do. DORA has over a decade of researching this question, and we've learned so much together with the community. And this has been a super fun conversation. I want to thank you both for having me on here on the Engineering Success Podcast. It's been super fun. And yes, we have thousands of more questions left unanswered and discussion points that we want to cover. I would definitely encourage you first to keep listening to this podcast because you all are doing a great job bringing in a lot of really great ideas. But then I would also invite everyone who's listening to join us over at dora.community, where these conversations will continue. Bring your additional questions to us there. And you don't need the answer from me. The DORA community are the experts on DORA. I'm just one of the voices in that community, and I'm happy to share, my thoughts. But really, collectively, that's where we have the most wisdom and can make the most progress.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Happy holidays. Hope
Yeah.
to see you again next year. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
By the way, every community member should get this DORA t-shirt.
Oh yeah,
I know.
I wanted to ask.
Yes, it's proving to be a little bit more difficult than it should be, but stay tuned. I may have some good news posted on the community list, maybe early next year, if not before the end of this year.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. Yeah. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Nathan.
All right. Thank you both.
Thank you so much for being with us. Stay tuned for more.